Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm joined in studio with the birthday boy, James. James, how are you?
Thanks, mate. Yeah, good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Is this the first time it's just the two of us?
It is, yeah, it's our debut.
It is. Big things coming.
Yeah. Welcome to Melbourne. It's nice to be in office together finally.
It is. It's good, but it's so hot and it's just no wind. So dry.
We're in Melbourne. You probably dated the podcast by just saying it's hot because it could be by the time people listen to this, it could be anything. It could be any season. It's
true. I mean, I've come here once and it's super hot like it is today. And then at night it's just, I didn't pack any jumpers. Yeah. And then you'd go out for dinner and it's you'd walk outside and go, ooh.
Yeah.
Freezing.
Wish you didn't just have your carry-on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but no, it's good. Love coming down to Melbourne. And today we're talking an interesting one, employee versus employer.
Yeah. Hopefully it's not versus, but we're talking salaries.
Battle.
Yeah. Hopefully we can kind of explore some collaborative ways to kind of talk about employees asking for pay rises and that sort of thing, and how to navigate that as an employer, because it can be a really kind of conflicting thing, or a tense thing. So just exploring that and possible trends at the moment too. Yeah,
for sure. It is an interesting one because now I'm sitting on the other side of the fence, whereas previously you'd go into these review meetings and you're right. I mean, it's a cause of anxiety. You don't know what you need to do or what could happen from this meeting. So I think it's good to get both perspectives.
100%. Yeah. It'll be a good chat.
I know we've got some stats here as well. Do you want to just touch on those?
Yeah. I mean, I think the basis of what we wanted to talk about today was, and what we hear a lot talking to businesses every day is kind of staff turnover and how to manage that. I think a lot of it is to do with salary now. Obviously, it's flexibility. The demands of the employee has changed a lot in the last probably 5 years. So that job mobility has slowed a little bit since 2022, which was the kind of the media term, the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle, whatever you want to call it. It's slowed, but it's certainly been consistently increasing for the last 20 years in terms of how frequently people move jobs, to the point now where Gen Z, you did a little bit of research, they are expected to average about 18 jobs across 6 careers or career kind of markets in their life. So cool. That's way more than any generation before them. And I think it's an interesting time for employers as they start to employ that generation to navigate the way in which Gen Z have kind of been brought up to think and approach career and life.
Why do you think that's the case?
I think I'm a bit older than Gen Z, but I think every generation has more choice. Yep. I think even 20 years ago, there was a lot more of a formula expected of what your life would be, from education to either uni or trade to even just societal norms of getting married, buying a house, all those sorts of things. As society's changed with obviously cost of living, with options, university degrees probably been worth a lot less than they used to be. My generation, our generation and younger are constantly kind of, even with social media, bombarded with options and probably simulating all those different options and second guessing themselves no matter which one they pick, because there's 5 other things they could have done at any given time. So do you think it could be a negative? Absolutely. Yeah. I think there can be a sense of entitlement or at least, thinking that there's something better all the time and a lack of patience that comes with that, which I think, again, talking to the people we talk to as small to medium-sized business owners, that's often the frustration is people aren't patient enough. They don't give me the chance to kind of meet their expectations or compromise. Often it is this kind of pay me more, or I've got 6 other options, so I'm going to go do that thing. Yep. Or I've been here for a year, I've been here for 2 years, I've done the job. Now, because inflation's kind of happened at the rate it has, pay me more. Yeah. And that's a really difficult thing as a small business owner in particular to kind of manage and navigate. Yeah,
for sure. And it is interesting because I look back, say 10 years ago and that was never a discussion.
Totally.
You'd be in there, you'd do your time, you would you'd do all those extras first and then you would get the pay rise, whereas now it's more of that instant gratification.
Yeah. I mean, it's a hard thing. We'll get into it more, but I think taking on a mortgage, having increased interest rates, cost of living, all these things are valid reasons for an employee to want or need a pay rise.
Yes.
but they're not necessarily a reason for the employer to give you one.
Agreed.
And that's what gets lost a little bit, I think, is going to the table, wanting to negotiate a higher salary for all the external reasons, but it's too far removed from what your job actually is, what your contract actually is, and what your agreement or expectations around work are. So I think that's often the disconnect.
Mate, nailed that. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've nothing to add to that. I think, yeah, well done.
Cool. Well,
Great,
I'd love to pick your brain as an employer a bit, just in terms of like your perspective or thoughts, or even just from people you've talking to dozens of business owners every week.
Yep.
How often do you review or think about even like someone's salary on your team?
For us, we do 2 reviews per year. In June, we do just more, it's not a salary review, but just a performance and how they're tracking with their KPIs. So Dan and I are in the process now of rejigging that and what that looks like, because we've had such a big influx of work. So we're just working out what are the KPIs going to be for the staff? What does that look like? And then every 12 months, that's when they get their pay review, and they'll have a bonus.
Okay.
Some type of bonus structure as well if they do hit those targets. And an interesting one that Dan and I are still discussing, because we're not HR or people experts, and it's like, well, how do you reward the stuff that isn't quite measurable?
Yes.
So like if someone's in a leadership position, what does that look like?
Totally.
Do you have to have different KPIs for the people under them? Like what if they don't hit them? So that's an interesting one. That's a work in progress.
It is tricky. I mean, I worked in kind of middle management, so managing above and below me, and the statistical or data measured bonus structure can be a blessing and a curse, because if you are wanting to reward or promote someone based on something like a leadership ability, that isn't as measurable, and it's really easy for people under them or adjacent to them to go, my numbers are better, but they're not looking at the same kind of KPIs that might be a bit more intangible that you as the employer might be.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to then compare and go, well, I'm doing on paper all the same things and I'm being paid less, but them as the employee and you as the employer aren't on the same page, because it can't, I don't think, can always just be the numbers.
I agree.
And that is a really tricky thing to figure out.
I agree. In our industry, it's like based off X amount of units getting done per week or per month. But if you're in a senior position or you're in a management position, well, you spend maybe 5-10 hours a week training someone.
Totally.
So how do you measure that?
Well, and that's where, again, as someone who's trained people, that becomes tricky, because if your KPIs are then based on the performance of someone you've trained, but you're not the person hiring, then it's going to be really easy for that person to go, that manager or trainer to go, hey, well, I didn't choose them. I've done the best with what you've given me here. But the reason I didn't hit the KPIs is because they're actually not up to it, not because my training was poor.
So true. And that's the thing. So how do you overcome that?
Totally. So I think it is really kind of culture dependent. It's industry dependent. And it probably does take some trial and error. And we were kind of chatting casually about it yesterday. It takes openness from the employer about, this is something I'm trying. Ultimately, we want to motivate you. We want buy-in. We want you to grow with us. We want your salary to grow with us, your role. And we're exploring the best way to do that. And not, I think that all the disconnect comes from not talking about it.
Yep. That's something that we do because we're setting new KPIs. We always tell the managers, and like we're not fresh, but we're relatively new in business. So we're very transparent with, look, we want to try this structure, see if that works. And if it does, fantastic, we'll roll with it. Because we want it to be a two-way street. We want to get as much feedback as we can from the people on the ground that are doing the actual work and that are going to be measured. So we always say, hey, look, this is what we're thinking. Do you think this is achievable with the current team structure?
Totally.
I'm speaking about like that up management position. Do we need to slot people in? So that way it's more of a two-way street. As opposed to, this is your target. This is what you're going to get. Go and do it.
And you'll be able to tell the difference between a high performer and a middle performer based on attitude towards that. Because when you're constantly getting your employees or your managers' perspective, if it's always negative, no matter how you kind of cut it, or you're always getting complaints, they're not probably bought into the kind of mission of the business as a whole in the way you'd want them to be. Because you want your top performers to kind of be open to making the mistakes with you, to experiencing those mistakes with you, and not that one-way relationship of, I do the work and you pay me fairly every single time, all rewards are fair for everyone, and I'm going to kick up a stink if it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. I think one thing that's topical, which we touched on before, I think with inflation rates where they are, it's become more and more of a thing for either employers to try or employees to push for their salary to increase with inflation rates. Do you think that's a fair expectation? Is that something you account for when you think about your team member's salary?
I think it's fair. I think as a business, they need to make sure that they're adjusting their prices to counter that too.
Just going to say this, yeah.
Because if you're countering that on the top end, then you shouldn't feel that when you are paying out your staff.
Totally.
So I think if you can make a conscious effort to focus on your pricing, then yeah, I don't see why that is an issue.
Totally. Well, and I think that's where a bit of self-awareness and kind of just general awareness comes into play from the employee side. Like if you know the business is making no more money than they were despite inflation rates, haven't changed pricing, and that they, from a business level, haven't adjusted for inflation, to then expect your salary to increase proportionally, obviously that's because you're just becoming a bigger expense.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously that's on the business itself to increase those prices, but going in and expecting that when they haven't or if they haven't, because it might be every 1 or 2 years that they revisit those prices. It's not going to be dynamic every single month.
Correct.
So, yeah, I think there's just got to be a bit of awareness from the employee on that side of things.
I agree. And I guess if you see it on the other side of that, to play devil's advocate as to why someone would disagree and say, no, I don't think so. Well, I guess thinking out loud, maybe as an employer, you could say, well, okay, cool, I understand that, but that's an outside factor. What have you done internally to keep up with that?
Yeah.
Just an idea, I guess, to play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
That's something that an employer could say.
Yeah, and I think if you're being for lack of a better term, a bit of a hard ass about it, it's like we've shaken hands, we've agreed on this contract to be paid X. You are delivering your side of it by doing the work. I'm delivering my side of it by paying you what we agreed. And there will be some people with that perspective.
Yeah.
I think.
There's no right or wrong way, not that I know of anyway. So I think it's important to, look, if you're the employer, you really want to hope you can have a two-way chat.
Totally.
Otherwise, if you're in a bit of a dictatorship, it's going to be a conversation that's going to suck. And you would know based off their character type and their personality type.
Totally. Yeah, I think, again, throughout all this, the theme is going to be that both sides need to approach this discussion or discussions around salary and remuneration, that tongue twister word, with a lot of empathy and just putting, Dave Ramsey always talks about just wearing the other people's shoes, just like understanding where they're at, being whether that's the business owner or the employee. And
I think a lot of these conversations when I've been the employee, the person sitting on the other side has a monster ego, and like they do have that. There's just that power imbalance where they think, well, I'm the boss, so this is what it is. But like we said at the start, times are different now, and the generation coming through, they're not going to stick around for 2 or 3 or 4 years to get to whatever the position may be. So,
well, that's, I guess, a question for you again with the people you talk to. Do you think probably the generation older than us that are probably most frustrated with the younger generation of that mobility, are they self-aware enough or have adapted quick enough as small business owners to the kind of increased demands of younger employees?
It's a tricky one because I don't typically agree with the younger generation. I wouldn't say not agree, but they said the younger generation coming through, there is sometimes that sense of entitlement where this is what so-and-so gets paid over there, so I should get paid that. Well, have you done the 10, 12-hour days?
Sure.
Have you put the hours in and have you developed your skill set? Again, like we said at the start, there's that instant gratification factor, and I think the older generation, they understand that you need to put the work in first and then you will be rewarded after. But that's just my opinion. Yeah,
I think there is an element of... obviously, for decades, there's been an imbalance between particularly the big corporate kind of employers and using and abusing young employees. And quite rightly, that's being kind of tried to reverse or at least being fought against by the younger generations, probably ours and younger. But I do think that attitude of almost anti-employer can easily bleed and be taken out on small to medium-sized kind of enterprises. And I think that's a bit misplaced. Obviously, there is really poorly run small businesses that are kind of run by hard asses who don't want to give anything out of their pocket. But I think that it can easily kind of bleed out and become a punching bag for not really anything they've done wrong in terms of this sort of stuff.
I agree. And you get that at the small end of town or the big end of town as well.
Totally.
But I think as a employee, employees need to understand as well. You can't just march in and go, I want a $10,000 or $15,000 pay cut. Like if that business is only profiting that much a month or like it's or per year, then you can't do that. Like they can't do the business would fall over.
I don't know if you've encountered this yourself, but if not, what I'd be interested in your perspective, because it's become a lot more topical with all the kind of cost of living, inflation type stuff, more and more people taking on side hustles.
I saw this question.
Yeah.
You're gonna like my answer.
Well, yeah. How would you, or how have you, or in theory, how would you manage or think about someone saying, or you finding out someone's got a side hustle outside of being your employee?
If it's in the same industry,
as in like a conflict of interest,
then no, it's a big no.
I think that's fair enough.
Like if someone was working for us and they had a bookkeeping business on the side,
sure,
then or an accountant, they do their own accounting on the side.
They're actively funneling leads to themselves.
Yeah, that's an option. I mean, for me in my business, I don't know, not selfishly, but from what I've seen with like clients leaving and people taking clients, it's a no at Great Space.
Fair enough. I think if it's a conflict of interest, that makes sense. But what about if someone, everyone's got an e-com store at the moment. Someone at your firm is just on the side. They're saying they're doing it out of hours, but on the side they have their own business that isn't in the same industry. Would you take that as like they're not giving enough to their day job, or would you be suspicious of that immediately? Or is that kind of just a norm that you would kind of just be fine with?
Frame that very well. I don't think it's an issue. I think if anything, I would think, okay, well, are they not getting fulfillment in their current role? Yes, it's outside of work hours, but this is my employer hat on, and then I'll put my employee hat on.
Yeah.
If it's outside of work hours, well, that's all good. But are they hours where they could be refining their skill set? And if we're having meetings and they're saying that they want to advance through the ranks or whatever you want to call it, are their actions showing that they want to do that? That's employer side.
Sure.
Look, I don't think it's that big of an issue. I mean, e-com site, to be honest, I can't see that being an issue. If anything, it's the time. And like if they're saying, I want to get to a partner level or director level or manager, well, okay. But you're using your hours to do an e-com store, that's totally different. If cash is the motivator,
yes,
by all means, go for it. And I guess to play devil's advocate and sit on the other side, great idea.
Yeah.
Like if you want to supplement your income.
Well, yeah, especially if, I guess from that side of things, if the employee is then putting less pressure on their salary and the increases of their salary on the employer, because for whatever reason they understand that's not kind of feasible at the time, and this is the way I'm going to supplement my salary and I'm still giving 9 to 5.
100%.
I can totally see the value
in
that.
And if you're hitting your targets and everyone's happy with you, by all means.
Totally.
I agree.
I do think it will become, just because it is, people do have 2 or 3 jobs a lot at the moment, it will become more of a norm for employers to know about the side hustles.
Yeah.
I think as such, it's going to be kind of bring to a head some of those discussions around employers being okay or not with that. But I do think it'll become more normal that everyone's just kind of aware.
Well, it's an interesting one, right? Because that comment that you made, like 2 or 3 jobs, if you go back 30, 40 years, or maybe not even now, some people are working 2 jobs. Well, what's the difference?
Totally.
Like, you would never sit there and go, you shouldn't go and work at a cafe at night.
Yeah. So you can pay for your kids' school fees or whatever. Yeah.
So it's an interesting one when you look at it from that perspective. I mean, like you hear the stories of our grandparents where they would go to work during the day, come home for dinner, hey, how you going? And then go to and work at night.
Yeah.
There's no issue with that.
No.
Like everyone's like, wow, like good on them for doing that.
Totally.
So to sit on the other side and take the bureaucratic hat off, I think there's nothing wrong with it.
No. Yeah. Well,
so now I don't know where I sit.
Both sides of the fence. You got splinters.
Yeah, that's it. But it's an interesting point. It is.
Yeah. I think, again, like we're talking about for all these elements, it's just awareness and continuing conversations around it. Like for you, then hearing that it's about their motivation and their engagement at work. And if you're interpreting that with just the knowledge they have a side
Correct.
hustle, but never actually talking to them about it or talking to them about their general job satisfaction,
100%.
going to be really easy for you to misinterpret that.
Yes.
And going to be really easy for them to start disengaging and finding more engagement outside of whatever the side hustle they have. So
I agree. Because if you're sitting there, if your boss is sitting there and they're going, oh, mate, you can't be doing that. Go, dude, I'm doing this to put my kids through private school or whatever it may be.
Sure. I also think the tricky thing is that transition for a lot of people, and I know there's people in this boat who listen to this podcast, they are really good at their job and they're trying to figure out how to make that their own business.
Yeah.
And that in-between time. And often that looks like a side hustle. And often they probably can't talk to their employer about it. And yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, that dynamic as how that evolves generally, and whether people are more open with their employer about, this is where I want to go. I'm not going to have the confidence to go completely out if I've got no existing client kind of customer base. It's just a really interesting kind of world that's evolving at the moment.
Because a lot of our listeners are in that position.
Yeah.
And it is a hard one and tricky one. But if I was to put the bureaucratic hat back on, I'd sit here and say, and that's exactly why you can't have your own clients.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's that fine balance.
Totally.
And I think, you're right. Transparency is so important. It really is. And look, if you're not working on it during the day at X job, then I can't see.
Kind of play on.
I think play on.
You alluded to kind of being demanding about a pay rise and some of the people who are like that. Have you got any or know of any kind of bad examples or really poor ways of going about that conversation from the employee side?
Yeah. I've been here for X amount of time, so I deserve a pay rise.
Yeah. And why to you is that not a good way of asking for a pay rise?
Because of what have you done? Like at the end of the day, you're here to perform a role.
Sure.
And if you have X, Y, and Z targets, have you hit those targets?
Yeah.
If yes or if no, why haven't you hit them? Mm-hmm. But just is she based off time, or just if you were to go to your employer and say, hey, inflation is X%, I need a pay rise. Okay, well, our pricing hasn't changed either, mate.
Sure.
So I think it's a tricky one.
Yeah. No, I think I totally agree. I think there's that, and then I think the big thing, again, from being in these discussions before or having them myself, the big one is trying to remove the emotion from it. And because, like we talked about at the start, this can be a really tense, conflict-orientated conversation that often neither side wants to have.
Yeah, it's so true.
If it's built up to be this thing that's never discussed until this one conversation that one of us has initiated, often on the employee side, the emotion of, again, all these outside factors of, because I've given my blood, sweat and tears, I've tried really hard, I've given time, puts more intensity into that conversation than there needs to be, and often will kind of put the employer or the manager in a difficult position because they're kind of left with two options. It's a yes or a no.
Yep.
And if it's a no, there's all this intensity on and expectation of, well, the employer's probably been building up to this thinking, or if I get a no, then this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do.
All of these made up scenarios.
Totally. And again, if from the employee side, the times I've seen it done best, and even just kind of reading and listening to people, it's all about that prep work you're doing beforehand. Obviously, ongoing conversations with the employer. I think it's fine to put it on the map and say, hey, like in 12 months, in 6 months,
I agree.
I want to be of X value to you, or I want to discuss my salary with you. But first, how do I bring you more value?
And I think that's going to be so well received, to be honest. I mean, like if someone came to me and said, they'd be like, oh, for sure, let's work out some type of KPI plan or some type of plan to get you there.
Yeah.
It's so much better to just waiting that 12 months and then you're just reactive to whatever someone else is telling you.
Well, exactly. So I would, always say don't go into that conversation, especially the first one, with an ultimatum in mind.
Yeah.
Go to that with the expectation it's going to be multiple conversations that flow on from that. And ideally, when you want to talk and like actually have that salary like reviewed, have a 6-month period, 3-month period at least, kind of building up to that, and have already been discussed about how you're providing value or how you can provide more value to the employer.
And if your employer is like isn't taking that initiative, well, you should take that initiative.
Well, totally. That was the tricky bit, I think, on the employee side of things when you mentioned like if they're not hitting their targets or goals. Sometimes they're not set by the employer.
Yeah, that's right.
You just rock up, employer thinks kind of out of sight, out of mind. I don't have any issues. Life goes on. They have no goals. And that work is where it can be really demotivating because there's less for the employee to quantify and build a case for themselves. But again, that's where I feel like if you've initiated that conversation early, put it on the map and said in the next 6 months, the best way of kind of framing this conversation, Chris Voss, an ex-FBI negotiator, had the best way I've seen it.
He wrote that, the Never Split the Difference. Is that guy?
Yeah, that guy. So he, his way of framing that is, how can I be guaranteed to be involved in projects that are critical to the strategic future of the company?
Yep.
Which is a bit jargony, but it's essentially saying, I want to directly move the company forward, the business forward, and that is going to drive value for you, which in turn, it's not even asking for it's not even mentioning salary or my own, if I'm the employee, my benefit. It is, how can I make your life better and easier? And then piggybacking off of that, once you do have a clear idea of how you can kind of drive the business forward, using that as your case study and as your backup for when you do have that conversation.
Yep. And even as an employer, like you can be like, you want to get on the front foot with this stuff too.
Totally.
So like having all these things mapped out in your head, so that way you can, if your staff, again, devil's advocate, if your staff aren't like that, then well, you should be like that. Totally. And bringing them into it, and so that way you get buy-in. If you get buy-in, for me personally, if you get buy-in and those people are performing really well, of course, that's going to be up for discussion, and sooner as well. It doesn't need to be 12 months. We've just plucked that number out. But if there's constant uptick in results and performance or whatever you're measured on, then by all means bring that forward, that review period.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, so from personally, I started on when I got my first job, like a really, really base salary. But of course, it's a no-brainer. But every time I was most satisfied and engaged and in my job and feeling great about my career was when that conversation was initiated by the employer. Yep. I often outside of like the biannual review period, being like, we see this, we know basically you're underpaid at this point because of the amount of value you're bringing. We want to review this and bring this forward, either in that biannual period or right now. And it's like, sick. I feel really seen. I feel like and they're reviewing my numbers. It's not just me having to bring that to them. And also, I guess, showing that initiative from the employer that like they're aware of the marketplace as well.
Yeah, because sometimes they're not.
Yeah. I think people can bury their heads in the sand a bit and go, okay, this is what X type of employee was worth 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and continue to hire or expect to hire at that rate. Yeah. So, yeah. It is. It's an interesting one. Funny story and a bit of a side note. Well, it's still on topic, but I remember my first ever job, I'm getting paid $36,500 as a salary. And me and Daniel, my business partner, were working together and we were in a tax training session and they were talking about the minimum wage. And the partners were in this meeting and were paid under minimum wage. And like me and Dan, I'm like, well, like I didn't know how much I was getting paid. I'm like, are you on X amount, like 36 and a half? And he's like, yeah. And we look at them and we're like, dude, we're getting shortchanged by like $2,000 a year. Wow. And they laughed. Is that all they did? Yeah. Wow. They fixed it. Yeah. But like we were on that. It was kind of like, gotcha. Like, yeah, it's like, I don't know. Did you mean to do that? Did you not mean to do that? So yeah, I think. Side note. If I was you, I'd be stinking from that. Oh, like, I'd be filthy. Because again, even outside of the prep or outside of the kind of bringing the business value, I think still an appropriate way of going about or initiating the beginning of those conversations is going, hey, look, I've just been like looking around, just trying to understand kind of the marketplace. I found 5 jobs of a similar title for similar role, and I don't know for sure. Would love your opinion, but it might be that I'm a bit underpaid here, or at least like there's a bit of a gap now with where the market's sitting. And I would expect that most employers would approach that from a collaborative way and go, oh, look, you probably are. Cool. Like, let's fix that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Or, well, actually, you're a junior, they're senior roles. Yeah. This is the difference. Yep. And then the conversation becomes, all right, well, what do I need to do to be a senior?
Yeah.
And that is, again, such a different conversation
It really is.
to I have done my job.
Yeah.
And a lot of people feel like, and again, I think this is a criticism of these more mobile generations is I've done my job and therefore for an extended period of time, maybe even done it well, and therefore, I deserve a raise.
Yeah. The generation of participation awards.
It's
Sorry.
controversial.
You can edit that one out. Too controversial.
Do you think one interesting kind of conundrum I feel like I've noticed a little bit is, do you think sometimes someone can become too valuable in their role, or it's actively an inconvenience for the employer to kind of promote them and remove them from being really kind of high performer?
I think if they're a narcissist and they see you as a threat, but like as a business owner, if you were like for me, if we were working together and you were that case, but I would have no issue with it. Like, good,
Sure.
yeah, for sure. Like you want people like that working for you.
Yeah.
But I think I think business owners a lot of the times they don't self-reflect, and like if staffing is an issue, well, okay, if you can't retain staff or no one wants to work with you, your average useful, that's a terrible way to describe a person.
Your asset.
Yeah. If the average, how would you phrase it? If the average tenure with you,
tenure.
yeah, tenure with you is 6 months. Well, why is that the case?
Totally.
Is there any reflection there?
Yeah, and I think there can be just an element of like, woe is me from it. Like, in my industry, no one wants to stay here for long, and like
Cop out.
Yeah. I think there can be that attitude where it's just like wash your hands of it, kind of sit there and whinge a little bit about it.
And on the other side as well, to play devil's advocate, like if someone sticks around for 4 or 5 years and they're complaining and they're miserable, well, why have you done that if you're not happy?
Totally.
So like it goes both ways. It always goes both ways.
Yeah.
I don't think there's one side that it sways more to than the other. At the end of the day, it's up to the individual and having the confidence. And even if it's not, if you're not confident when you're having that chat, but just have your ducks in a row. You don't want to go into these chats and have nothing go, I want a pay rise because of
100%.
whatever.
Yeah.
Insert whatever sentence.
Yeah.
Well, no, like take the initiative.
Yeah.
If you can take the initiative on both sides, then the result will be a win-win.
Yeah. And I think that's where it takes kind of that empathy and flexibility, I think, from the employer too, where it's like, I might have a really high-performing account manager, I don't know, whatever they are, and I don't think they're a natural leader, and I don't even know if I want them to manage staff, so I can't promote them per se, but I will be flexible about salary and tying in bonuses or profit incentives, whatever, that can then motivate them and reward them in a different way, rather than going, well, they're an account manager, so I can't actually pay them more than this band. I can't pay them more than this bracket that I found online because that will break my business. But I also don't want to promote them because they're not a leader.
Yeah. And it's an interesting one because in a lot of these service-based businesses where you get promoted to a management level, generally you start off with technical expertise or your own technical expertise, and then you get promoted to manage people with technical expertise.
Yes.
But it's
completely different skill set. And I did that. That was something that I really had to adjust to because, again, like the side hustle to full-time business thing, your skill set is one, but then your daily kind of job becomes almost none of those same skills.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you're not trained like adequately, or your personality doesn't suit that, and you've just been a top performer, I saw a lot of people fail in that too because one, they weren't set up for success because they weren't trained appropriately. But two, they didn't really have interest in managing people.
Yeah.
They just wanted a promotion and a salary increase.
That's right.
And that's where it takes that kind of innovation, imagination from the employer to go, okay, identify skill sets, identify who are my cultural leaders and who have ability to actually train up other people, not just top performers, because they can be very different skill sets. And from the other side, I think that's where sometimes if it's not openly talked about, the employee can go, well, why is this person promoted and not me?
Yes.
I'm actually better at my job than them. But that's not the reason the employer's promoted them. It's because that other person who may not be as good at their job as you was a better cultural influence, was more kind of able or ready to lead people, which again is such a different skill set.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Awesome. I think that's pretty much what we've got today.
Yeah, good stuff. That was a good episode.
Great one. Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.